Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Who here has traveled from outside of North Carolina, just out of curiosity? Whoa! Welcome, welcome. Is this your first time in North Carolina? Cool. How many people do we have here from Wilmington? Oh my gosh. Okay, well, yay for the Wilmingtonians here. Well, anyway, one of the questions that we do get asked about the ship is it actually real? The answer is yes. It is the real Battleship North Carolina. She served in World War II, and she was the most decorated battleship of World War II. Does anybody know the most decorated ship of World War II? Correct. Who said the Enterprise? Absolutely. Did you know that the North Carolina often sailed next to the Enterprise? The Enterprise was a carrier. And so her responsibility as a carrier, of course, is to launch the planes, that would, bomb and fight other things. Well, the battleships often sailed next to carriers to protect them because they had guns. Carriers had a lot of planes. Battleships, of course, had a lot of guns. She was commissioned in 1941, and she was the first ship. I'm getting ahead of myself. She was originally going to serve in the Atlantic, but then Pearl Harbor happened, and this is a very interesting story in that she was the first ship after Pearl Harbor to sail into the port. And the story goes that, all the crew was up on the deck, in their whites and stuff as she was coming into Pearl Harbor, and they saw all these people on the shore with flags and banners and all this stuff, and they were waving them, and they were really, sort of, well, good grief, why are they all excited that we're here? And the reason is because they were used to destroyed battleships, things were still smoking, and there were still some fires and things like that, and the people of Hawaii knew that they were the next island to go. See, because the Japanese were slowly going island by island. And so when the North Carolina came in, she was brand new. She had just been commissioned. She was modern. She was this gleaming ship that came in. And so when they saw her coming in, they were like, there's hope for us. And so that's one of the receptions that she got. One story that you would be interested in hearing is that of Tommy Thompson. One of our most active sections on the ship is the mess decks. And that's one of the areas where you're going to be going to tonight. Now, Tommy Thompson, he worked in the engine room. The engine room is another section where you're going to go tonight, okay? So what the sailors used to do is that they would climb up this ladder from the engine room up to the mess decks to get some breakfast and whatnot. Well, as he was climbing up the ladder, you'll see these throughout the ship. There are like these railings. And what they were for is that they would move these heavy projectiles, these 2,500-pound projectiles, from one point to another point. Because, of course, the battleship is all about the guns. She's not about the men, she's about the guns. One of the things that held that in place broke loose, fell, and hit Tommy in the head. And so he fell down like about 5 decks and to his death. And that was right there in that mess deck area. So we tend to attribute a lot of activity in the mess decks to Tommy Thompson. So you may want to ask about him tonight and things like that. We've seen the Shadow Man in the mess decks, different things like that. So, hopefully he'll come out and play with you. As far as I know, the latest activity that I definitely know that happened in the mess decks was that somebody had like a $6,000 camera on something, and it went flying across the room and smashed into the bulkhead. So Tommy wanted to get their attention, I think. So I hope nobody brought anything too expensive. The second area that you're going to be going to is the sick bay. The neat thing about the sick bay that's important to know is that the ship often took on wounded from other ships. And so we have our crew members who died on board, but there also were other men from other ships who died. And so a lot of times people in the sick bay area will get things like, something burning or something like that. And there was a man who was retrieved from a carrier who came onto the battleship who died from severe burns. So from the historian perspective, all I can do is just sort of put pieces together, but I depend on paranormal evidence to help make sense of some of the history. The big story is that of the torpedo area, and that's going to be down in the third deck area where you're going to be going to tonight. Now, we can't actually let you go into the torpedo area this time, and the reason is because the ship is undergoing some major construction right now. And so that area is off limits, but we've got you as close as you can be, because there's some live power and all that stuff, and it's just totally dangerous. And it was 1942. The ship was struck by a Japanese torpedo. She was on the port side. Now, who knows the difference between port and starboard? All the guys raising their hands. Some girls, yay. Some ladies. Okay, if you're looking up toward the bow, how I like to remember it is left is port, 4 letters in port, 4 letters in left. That's how I tend to remember it. So the left side is the port side, and the sailors in the EVP session, they tend to respond if you use as many nautical terms as you can. Like, for example, instead of saying a floor, say deck. The wall is a bulkhead, things like that. A door is a hatch, various things like that. Bed is a berth, Anyway, so it was 1942. The ship was struck by a torpedo on the port side. There was 4 men in this particular area. 1 man was blown off the side of the ship on the main deck. Well, what happened is that, of course, she started taking on a lot of water, and the role of the crew is to protect the ship or the men? The ship, right? So they slammed the hatches shut. They knew the guys were back in there, but there was nothing that they can do. Also, the crew who was in there knew that that's exactly what they were going to do. Now, I believe that it's a testament to the quality of their training that within 30 minutes of having been struck by the torpedo, the ship rejoined the fleet because they counterflooded the starboard side. They were able to join the fleet. Now, 3 days later, they went to the island of Tonga Taboo, which is where they went inside to retrieve the bodies. The story goes that in order to do so, the sailors had to get drunk to do it. Okay? And when the bodies were retrieved, they had been burned because underneath the deck, imagine, if you will, the floor below us blew up. That's sort of what happened. So, and that was where the oil and fuel and things like that were for the ship. So, that's what happened. So, in all, we had 13 men died on the ship, crew members, 10 killed in action. Tommy Thompson is part of is not listed in the killed in action because he was actually killed while the ship was undergoing shakedowns. Of course, the war ended in 1942. The ship was decommissioned in 1947. From 45 to 47, she served as a training vessel for officers and whatnot. And then she went to the reserve fleet in New Jersey. And then in 1961, she was going to be sold for scrap metal. But then the citizens of North Carolina, all those North Carolinians out there, said no, she belongs here. And so a lot of the school children saved their milk money, raised enough money to bring the ship home. And last year, we celebrated our 50th anniversary of being in Wilmington. So the other thing about the ship is that she does serve as the state's World War II memorial. So from my perspective, that means sometimes that it's just not maybe a crew member who could be on board, but also maybe somebody from another service auxiliary who is here because it happened to serve as the memorial. The other thing that is really striking me, because as more and more groups come to investigate the ship, they're just telling me that they're just hearing or feeling that there's many people on board. And then at first I thought that was very troubling because I would think that it would just be members of the crew. But then it occurred to me that many of the original crew members are dying because they're in their 80s. Every year they have a crew reunion here. In fact, they will be here in May. And we usually get about 200 to 300 of the original crew members left, who come every year, but now they're down to about 25, because they're in their mid-80s now. And so I'm wondering if one of the crew members who have died is now, stopping by to say hello. An interesting thing about the torpedo hit, is that in 1995, at the 50th anniversary of World War II, the original crew members were able to meet the crew members of the Japanese sub who sunk the ship, or who hit the torpedo. The Japanese claimed several times to have sunk the North Carolina, and of course, they didn't. Well, what they did is that the crew presented the Japanese with a plaque with part of their torpedo in it. And they said, here's your torpedo back. That plaque is now hanging in a museum in Japan. So I just think that was really neat that they were able to meet actually on board the ship, and become friends at that point. So, I'm trying to think. Does anybody have any historical questions or anything like that they want, or? Let me see.
How are we doing on a historical question?
Yes.
What is the temperature like on the ship?
What is the what?
What is the temperature like? Cold? Is it 90? What is the temperature?
She asked, what is the temperature like on the ship? It really varies depending on what's going on. Right now, it's a little muggy on the ship because it's been so warm lately. In the summer, it's unbearably hot. Probably going to be sweating a lot in the summer. So right now, it's going to be nice, not because the steel tends to absorb that heat. Just like in the winter months, it's going to keep that cold sort of in. So, anybody else have any other question? Any other questions? The tour, I just want to make a little note about the tour. The tour is marked with glow sticks and directional signs. So if for whatever reason you find yourself getting lost, just look for one of those glow sticks. They should hopefully just lead you the way. Please be careful because the deck is uneven in some spaces and things like that. So just be aware of that. Yes, sir.
How many decks would be able to test it?
You are going to be going primarily on 2 decks. On the second deck, which is going to contain the mess decks and the sick bay area. Then you're going to go into the third deck, which is going to be the engine room area and also the torpedo hit area. If you come for a regular tour during the day, there are 9 decks available. If you come back for like a private investigation, those whole 9 decks will be available to you. Any other questions? I feel like I flew through a lot of that history. Yes, sir.
The plaque that they gave back to Japanese, do you know where that's at?
To be honest with you, I don't know. I would imagine that it would probably be in either a World War II museum in Japan or a naval museum in Japan. I would imagine. I know that there is a book that they sell in the gift shop. To me, it's one of the best books about the battleship, and it's where I learned a lot of my information. It's by Captain Ben Lee. It's just called Battleship North Carolina, and he was the information officer on board the ship during World War II. And he's written this book, and so I think that book is a great resource. Another thing that I think would be interesting to note as you go through the ship and do some EVP sessions is to note, if you can actually see it because it's going to be so dark, the color. Like for example, in the mess decks, you're going to have a cream colored bulkhead or wall and like a rust colored floor or deck. Okay, that designates an enlisted man's area. So that's where their working space and whatnot. Now, once you move into sick bay, you're going to notice that everything's going to be green. Other than it being St. Patrick's Day, does anybody know why that space may be a different color? Because this could be important as far as EVPs are concerned. It's green because that designates an officer's area. Because a doctor would be an officer, and so doctors would be in the sick bay. So when you're on board, So you might want to know, am I speaking to an officer? Am I speaking to an enlisted man? Because you may get a different response because certain people are used to being talked to and responding in a different way. So I always, and yes ma'am?
Are there officers' quarters going to be available?
The officers' quarters are right there near the sick bay area. I don't mind if y'all sort of go, but I don't want to mess up Alex's tour route section either. So it might be up to your group leader how much you can explore. You know, because any area is open on the ship, but I don't want to mess up his tour route. So, that's all right. And it is interesting to see the difference between an officer and an enlisted man. For example, an officer, they got to eat in the wardroom, they had actual china, they were served, you know, they had a wait staff and things like that. But they had to pay for their laundry, they had to pay for their food, they had to pay for their haircuts, which would be about 10 to 15% of their pay, versus an enlisted man who didn't have to pay anything at all. So it's just an interesting thing. The menus, of course, varied between an officer and an enlisted man, but not that much. So I think that, you know, if you were an enlisted man, you were really treated well on board the ship. Any other questions?